This further. A very good evening to you, Kate.
Good
evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, what inspired this, you would have seen the story about Ntomzodwa Mukaya of City Press and what happened to her in Malawi. What was your initial reaction? Let's just start there when hearing about it.
We were shocked. We were absolutely shocked. It was interesting. You know, the story was circulating, and we were saying, that sounds absolutely awful. I mean, to be, you know, you arrive at the airport, you're immediately taken to the police station, you're held overnight, you're forced to sit on the floor, and then you're immediately deported the next day. And the stories that you're wanting to do, you basically can't do any of them. Yeah, so our sense was like one of quite a lot of shock.
And what made me wonder was, is it a question of journalists not being protected enough in communities and society, or is it a cross-border thing? The fact that you are going into another country, therefore you're rendered vulnerable, irrespective of whether or not you're a journalist.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think that journalists are being protected less and less, and I think that that's very worrying because, I mean, we saw the whole incident with Angela Quintal in Tanzania, and then I was speaking to various journalists, and they were saying, you know, actually we're kind of a little bit more worried about going, you know, overseas, you know, the African continent, but not only the African continent, also apparently India as well. You know, you put journalists on your forms and people are like,
I think it's everywhere.
What are you doing?
Really. I mean, my personal experience has been that some countries question you about your profession exactly a lot more. Some countries during visa applications look at the countries like the US where you've been and say, we're not sure if you can come in here.
Exactly. And apparently the trends are that is becoming more of an issue, not less of an issue. And of course for SANEF that's very worrying.
Why is that? Why do you think that is the case?
So I think the media is under attack. I think it's under attack more. I think that you know, it's hugely problematic to have somebody like President Trump in the White House because, you know, America was seen as like one of the countries that really protected freedom of expression. Although in fact, you know, they've never been number one. It's actually been some of the Nordic countries that have been number one. But I think having somebody, you know, a lot of these people in leadership positions that are not protecting freedom of expression means that you've got a problem.
But do you think that people in general not only understand the exigencies of journalism, but also the importance thereof? Do they view it?
No, and I also think that this is the issue, is that with the incredible power of social media, you know, often people feel, well, you know, we can get our news elsewhere. We don't need to necessarily get it from journalists or from the established media. You know, we'll get it from friends and family, we'll get it from social media. But the interesting thing there is that I think more and more people are beginning to get a bit worried about that and sort of saying, well, actually, we can't guarantee that it's truthful. In fact, a lot of the time it isn't. And that is meaning that then there are some interesting trends backwards to people saying, let's go to the established media.
So let's look at the rules and the laws that protect journalists. I mean, a country like South Africa, there isn't a high number of journalists who are killed, but there certainly are concerning levels of intimidation.
Yes.
And are we aware also of the various forms of intimidation against journalists?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. So there are a lot of different forms. So there's a lot of cyberbullying, and so I think we've got a lot of online harassment, which of course, you know, when social media wasn't quite so powerful, was less of an issue. But that's not only kind of online, it's also, and particularly during election periods. I mean, so community members will sometimes attack journalists, the police will sometimes attack journalists, political people, you know, party leaders can have and have attacked journalists. So we're seeing the temperature rising, and at all those different levels, journalists are under threat.
Is it during a particular time where journalists are more vulnerable during, obviously, ahead of elections, the campaigning period? Then there are a lot more dangerous stories, as it were, that journalists look into?
Yes. So I think that, you know, election periods and the lead up to elections are generally periods where people are worried. So for instance, the Committee for the Protection of Journalists has actually put together a whole toolkit for South African journalists, particularly for the selection period.
So what do you do? What do you do if you're a journalist?
So interestingly, so there's a whole lot of different things. So for instance, if you know, or you will not know, but if you believe that there's going to be some kind of problems, and you know, it's a hot area, there's lots of contestation, you've got to be, generally it's better for you to go with a colleague, not to go alone. It's also very important, if you're going to a particular rally or whatever it is, that you know the area well, you've got clear maps, you know how to get out, that you have no problems with your, you know, you make sure that whatever vehicle you're going in, that vehicle is safe, and that you're not going to have any problems with breakdowns. You make sure that people know where you are, where you're going, when you're going, what time you're arriving, and you're constantly keeping in touch with your news editors. So those are some of the tips that CPJ has put into their toolkit.
So Kate, I'm thinking if you're doing a top secret investigative story, the chances of you sounding the alarm to people to saying, I'm arriving in your country today, or please look out for me, are zero. So,
which makes it all the more difficult.
Exactly.
So that was the thing which I think was so interesting about the City Press going into Malawi and actually Ntombi looking at Prophet Bashiri, because the thing is that what I think was, and this is something which we thought was very dangerous as SANEF, is that obviously there were clearly networks that were working from South Africa, had clear links in Malawi with the authorities, with the immigration authorities and with the police, and were stopping her from doing that story. So you're absolutely right, it was very worrying. And when she came into immigration, people in immigration knew which hotel she was staying at, and she was like, but nobody knows this. Even the person that's coming to pick me up doesn't know which hotel I'm booked in.
Is there more spying on journalists now than ever before?
Look, the Right to Know campaign has been doing quite a lot of work on that, and they have picked up trends. You know, it's difficult at this point to sort of say, you know, like how strong that is, but certainly there is anecdotal evidence, at least, that there is definitely more surveillance around
What is the impact of targeting journalists on the broader society? I mean, just for somebody who's watching and saying, why should I care? If you're going to get yourself in a dangerous situation, what does it matter?
I think, and that's such a good question. I mean, the issue is that if journalists can't go in and investigate, then we as the public are never going to know what's happening. So, for instance, with Prophet Bashiri, he's got huge influence in South Africa. It's very important that journalists can go and find out about his background. Where does he come from in Malawi? And whatever the story might be, corruption stories, or, you know, what's happening with people in leadership positions, you need journalists to be able to go there.
Quick one, Kate.
Yes.
As you said, whatever the story might be, but journalists, as in their credibility and their integrity, has taken quite a knock following revelations that there have been fake news stories or manipulation of news and stories. Do you think that makes people less sympathetic or empathetic?
Yes, I think it absolutely does. Hence the fact that we are going to do a huge inquiry into that and look at ways that we can improve the ethics, because you're right. And if we don't have sympathy, then we're going to be in a problem.
Thank you so much for chatting to us. Kate Skinner is the Executive Director of SANEF.